In The Revenge of the Sith, Anakin, after having visions of Padme dying, goes to Yoda for guidance. Anakin tells Yoda that he's been having visions of someone close to him dying, and that he wouldn't let these visions come true. Hearing all of this, Master Yoda advises Anakin to train himself to let go of everything he fears to lose. Which, by the way, was great advice, but it was given to the wrong person at the wrong time, and we all know what was the result of it. So in this video, let's explore an alternate Star Wars timeline where Yoda actually decided to help Anakin. So everything will be the same as it was in the original timeline, until the point where Yoda tells Anakin that he should train himself to let go of everything he fears to lose. So here, unlike in the original timeline, instead of getting up and leaving, Anakin would sit there in silence for a moment, and then he would tell Yoda that he can't let go of her. Yoda would then ask Anakin who he's referring to. Anakin would then sit in silence, not knowing what to say, and Yoda would get up, walk over to Anakin, and tell him that he can trust him. Anakin would then say with some hesitation that it's the Senator. Yoda would immediately figure that it's Senator Amidala that Anakin is referring to, and ask Anakin what exactly he saw in his vision, to which Anakin would say that he saw her screaming in agony. Hearing this, after taking a moment to think, Yoda would explain to Anakin how premonitions work in more detail. Yoda tells Anakin that the future is always in motion and that Force visions are not absolute truths. Yoda would go on to explain that while these visions that Anakin was having provided insight into the future, the shaping of the actual future was influenced more by the actions taken in the present. And because of this, premonitions should always be analyzed with extreme care and considered as possible outcomes instead of predictions of the future. Yoda also cautioned Anakin of the deceptive nature of these visions, because the feelings and emotions that one has could cloud their interpretation of these premonitions and lead them down dark paths, which is exactly what happened in the original timeline. Anakin thought that to prevent these visions from becoming true, he needed to gain more power, which allowed Sidious to manipulate Anakin into falling to the dark side. But in this alternate timeline, because Yoda took a closer interest in what Anakin was going through, a lot will change, as you will see. Yoda would then advise Skywalker to meditate on these visions that he's been having and to come to him if he needs any help. Anakin would then thank Master Yoda, get up, and leave. So, in this timeline, because of what Anakin shared with Yoda and how Yoda reacted to it, Anakin would actually take Yoda's advice and meditate on his visions, and Yoda would decide to keep a closer eye on Skywalker. Yoda will also share with Obi-Wan and Mace Windu what Anakin said and about Anakin's concern over Padme's safety. Anakin being close to Padme wouldn't really surprise anyone. Also, I've always felt like Anakin and Padme's relationship was more of an open secret than anything else. The people closest to Anakin probably knew that something was up between the two, although none of them knew that they were married, of course. Anyways, fast forward to Palpatine making Anakin his personal representative on the Jedi Council. This would play out pretty much the same. Anakin would still be denied the rank of Master, but this time Anakin wouldn't be so angered by this, because one of the reasons why Anakin wanted the rank of Master so bad was because only the Jedi Masters could access the restricted section of the Jedi Archives within the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. And as for why the Jedi Archives had a restricted section, well, that's because this section of the archives contained forbidden knowledge, basically, knowledge on Sith techniques, and it also contained Sith holocrons. So Anakin hoped to gain the rank of Master to enter the archives and study these Sith techniques in the hopes of gaining more power to stop these visions from becoming true. But in this alternate timeline, Anakin knows not to treat his visions as absolutes because of what Yoda said, and because of this, he wasn't obsessed to gain access to the restricted archives. So when Anakin was denied the rank of Master, while he was still angry about it, Anakin didn't say anything, instead just bowed and took his seat. And also, like in the original timeline, Yoda decides to go to Kashyyyk after Ki-Adi-Mundi brings up the droid attack on the Wookiees. But unlike in the original timeline, when Obi-Wan asks Anakin to spy on the Chancellor, Yoda would also accompany Obi-Wan, and then Yoda would explain to Anakin why they needed to know what the Chancellor was up to. Yoda does this because in this timeline, Yoda has at least some idea of what Anakin is going through, and realizes that the last thing they needed to do right now was to make Anakin feel like he couldn't trust the Jedi. But still, upon being given the mission, Anakin would argue that the Chancellor is a good man, and that the Council shouldn't put him in this position. Yoda would actually agree with Anakin. He'll say that the Chancellor is a good man, but argue that even good people can sometimes make bad choices, and given the predicament that the Republic was in, they couldn't afford even a single bad choice, which is why the Council needed to know what Palpatine was up to. Yoda would explain to Anakin that everything the Council was doing was to keep the Republic safe, and nothing more. Anakin listens to all of this and nods in agreement. accepting the mission. So anyways, later on, after being summoned, Anakin goes to see the Chancellor in the Galaxy's Opera House, which is where in the original timeline, Palpatine told Anakin of the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. So in this timeline, everything is the same, except Anakin doesn't say that his trust in the Jedi has been shaken, which is what in the original timeline led Palpatine to uncover that Anakin had been tasked with spying on the Chancellor by the Jedi Council. So since Anakin doesn't say that his trust in the Jedi has been shaken, Palpatine doesn't figure out that Anakin has been tasked with spying on him. Palpatine would then go on about how the Jedi were planning to betray him and how they did not believe in democracy, to which Anakin would say that the Jedi do not crave power and that they only care about others. Hearing this, Palpatine would pause for a moment and then would ask Anakin if he's heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. The reason why Palpatine brings up the tragedy of Darth Plagueis here is because he realizes that he cannot turn Anakin against the Jedi by simply accusing them of betraying the Republic. And that's why he brings up the tragedy of Darth Plagueis, to tell Anakin that Darth Plagueis, through use of the dark side, could keep people from dying, which is a technique that Anakin could now learn from the Jedi. And as for how Palpatine knew that Anakin feared losing someone close to him, well, Palpatine was a powerful Sith Lord, and he could definitely sense the fear of loss that was within Anakin, especially since Palpatine has sensed the very same fear in Anakin before this, when Anakin had visions of his mother dying, which by the way Anakin did share with Palpatine. We know this because Palpatine mentions this after Anakin cuts off Dooku's head. So Palpatine could definitely recognize the same exact fear in Anakin, and from that, deducing that Anakin had a romantic relationship with Padme, and that the fear of loss he had was, in regards to her, must not have been too hard for the powerful Darth Sidious. So the point is, the reason why Palpatine brings up the tragedy of Darth Plagueis and how he could stop people from dying was to manipulate Anakin into falling to the dark side, to convince Anakin that only the dark side could save Padme's life. So like in the original timeline, Palpatine would tell Anakin about how Darth Plagueis was a Dark Lord of the Sith, so powerful and wise that he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying. This would intrigue Anakin because even though Yoda's advice helped mitigate some of the fear that he had about his visions coming true, a way to actually stop people from dying, if the visions were to come true, would definitely be useful. So Anakin asked Palpatine if it's possible to learn this power, to which Palpatine would say, not from a Jedi. So later on, after Anakin says goodbye to Obi-Wan, as he leaves for Utapau to deal with General Grievous, Anakin gets another Force vision as he's with Padme. But this time, unlike in the original timeline where he saw Obi-Wan is to Padme as she's dying, in this timeline, Anakin sees Palpatine calling out to Anakin for help. So as for why this happens, well, it's like Yoda says, the actions taken in the present influence the future, and Force visions are not absolute. So in this timeline, because of Yoda's advice, Anakin, instead of lusting after power like he did in the original timeline, chose instead to meditate on the visions he had of Padme dying. And because of this action that Anakin took in the present, the future, which like Yoda said is always in motion, changes. And now instead of Padme, Anakin sees Palpatine, screaming out in pain. So after seeing this vision and thinking about it, Anakin would contact Yoda and tell Yoda about what he saw. Because in this timeline, Yoda did tell Anakin to let him know if he had any more visions. And because of that, Anakin tells Yoda about the vision he had about Palpatine. So after hearing Anakin talk about his visions of Palpatine, Yoda would tell Anakin to remember what he said earlier and to meditate on these visions, and also to not let these visions affect his judgment in any way. Yoda assures Anakin that he will help him. Anakin thanks Yoda, and the transmission ends. So after he's done talking with Anakin, Yoda would become very confused as to the nature of these visions that Anakin is having. And as Yoda's mind dwells on these visions, he would think about something Obi-Wan said about Count Dooku. So in case you don't remember, in Attack of the Clones, Count Dooku tells Obi-Wan that the Republic was under the control of a Dark Lord of the Sith called Darth Sidious. But at the time, no one believed him. Yoda's mind then goes to the incident with Clone Trooper CT-5555, better known as Fives. So in case you haven't seen the Clone Wars, to summarize, Fives was a clone trooper who pretty much figured out the purpose of the inhibitor chips that were present inside of every clone trooper. Fives also made the connection between these inhibitor chips and Chancellor Palpatine, but when he tried to explain all this to Anakin Skywalker, he didn't believe Fives, and in the commotion, Fives was killed. Yoda obviously knew about it, but like pretty much everyone else, he too thought Fives was having some kind of a mental breakdown. Yoda would then think of the vision he had while he was on Dagobah. So for those of you who haven't seen the Clone Wars, to summarize, in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, Yoda does end up on Dagobah, and while there he gets a vision of Order 66. He sees the Jedi and the clones fighting, he sees Shaak Ti getting stabbed with the blue lightsaber, but Yoda did not share any aspect of this vision he had with any of the other masters or anyone really, because Yoda decided to place his trust in the Force, hoping that it would guide him. But this decision, as seen in the original timeline, ended the entire Jedi Order. But in this alternate timeline, as Yoda revisits this vision he had on Dagobah, comparing it with what Count Dooku said, what Five said, and with Anakin's Force visions, Yoda arrives at the conclusion that Chancellor Palpatine might be working for Darth Sidious. Yoda would later meditate on this, but due to the dark side's influence on the Jedi at the time, Yoda's vision was clouded. But Yoda did hear something, a voice telling him that his arrogance blinds him. After Yoda leaves his meditation, a sense of impending doom would fall upon Yoda, and he would immediately contact the other masters, because if what Yoda thinks is true, that would mean the Republic is under the control of the Sith. Yoda would tell the other masters that they needed to immediately look into this, because if his fears are true, then it might already be too late for the Jedi. Okay, so at this point we switch over to Mandalore, because in case you don't remember, as all this is happening, Darth Maul has been captured by Ahsoka Tano from Mandalore. Again, for those of you who haven't seen the Clone Wars, Ahsoka Tano was Anakin Skywalker's apprentice. She was forced to leave the Jedi Order after she was falsely accused of doing something. And also, Darth Maul did not die, and at this point in the Star Wars timeline, is the leader of Mandalore. There's also Bo-Katan Kryze, who wants to take back control of Mandalore from Maul, and to do that, she enlists the help of the now non-Jedi Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka contacts Obi-Wan and Anakin for their help, but this was happening around the time when Anakin and Obi-Wan went to rescue the Chancellor, the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. So instead of going there by himself, Anakin sends a squadron of clone troopers to help back Ahsoka up. So Ahsoka, along with these clone troopers, with the help of Bo-Katan Kryze and her supporters, attack Mandalore and in the end, capture Darth Maul. So all of that happens as it did in the original timeline, until what is about to happen now. So before their duel on Mandalore, Maul actually tells Ahsoka quite a bit about Darth Sidious, including how Anakin has long been groomed to be Darth Sidious's apprentice. At first, Ahsoka actually agrees to help Maul take down Darth Sidious, but as soon as Maul mentions that he orchestrated this war on Mandalore to bring Anakin Skywalker there so that he could kill him, Ahsoka turns against him due to her trust in Anakin Skywalker. She tells Maul that his vision is flawed, and they begin their duel. But in the end, ultimately, Maul is captured by Ahsoka and the clones, and then Ahsoka meets with the Masters. She tells them that she has Maul in custody, and then asks to speak with her former master, Anakin Skywalker. So all of this happens right after this scene where Mace Windu tells Anakin to go tell the Chancellor that Obi-Wan has defeated General Grievous. So Mace Windu tells Ahsoka that he just sent Anakin to meet with the Chancellor. And when Ahsoka is told that Kenobi has defeated General Grievous, Ahsoka concludes that the war would be over soon, to which Mace Windu would reply with, "That depends on the Chancellor." Ahsoka would then ask Mace Windu what he means by that, to which in the original timeline, Mace Windu replied by telling Ahsoka that these are matters for the Jedi Council to decide, and that since she, Ahsoka, left the Order, none of this is her concern. But in this alternate timeline, Yoda, who was also present during this council meeting in both the original and this alternate timeline, would speak up before Mace could say anything. Yoda does this because he's now desperate for information on Darth Sidious, and he knows that Darth Maul was probably Sidious's apprentice. So before Mace could reply, Yoda would interject and ask Ahsoka if she learned anything of value from Darth Maul about Darth Sidious. After a moment of hesitation, Ahsoka would tell Yoda what Maul said about the Republic being under the control of Darth Sidious. Yoda would then ask what she wanted to say to Skywalker, but Ahsoka would be extremely hesitant to share the information about how Anakin was being groomed to be Darth Sidious's apprentice. Sensing this, Yoda would ask Mace if he could tell Anakin to immediately return and speak with Ahsoka, because the information she had needed to reach Skywalker as soon as possible. Mace agrees, and unlike in the original timeline where Anakin goes to Palpatine and Palpatine reveals himself to be a Sith, here Anakin is called back by Mace Windu before he could reach the Chancellor, telling Anakin that it's extremely urgent. So shortly thereafter, Anakin and Ahsoka would be talking to each other. Ahsoka would then tell Anakin everything Maul said about how Anakin was being groomed to be Darth Sidious's apprentice, and how Maul orchestrated the war on Mandalore with the sole purpose of bringing Anakin there and killing him. Maul wanted to deprive Sidious of his prized pupil, as he put it, Ahsoka would say. After hearing all of this, Anakin Skywalker would be rightly confused, on top of all the confusion he already had. Anakin would argue that Maul is lying because who could possibly be grooming him to be their apprentice? Anakin would wonder. Anakin would then demand to speak with Maul, which would be arranged as Maul was being transported to Coruscant. Also, unless I'm mistaken, this would be the first time Anakin has seen Maul since Maul tried to run him over in The Phantom Menace. Anyways, upon being brought face to face, at least by holograms, Maul would immediately tell Anakin how much he wants to kill him. But when Anakin asks him who Darth Sidious is, Maul would call Anakin a fool for not seeing it. Maul will tell Anakin that Sidious has been manipulating him ever since he arrived on Coruscant, and he will go on to say how much he hates Anakin again, this time for replacing Maul as Sidious's apprentice. All this would make Anakin even more angry. If this were the Clone Wars, the Imperial March would be playing in the background, and Anakin yells at Maul and asks him who Darth Sidious really is. We'll then pick up with Mace, Yoda, and Obi-Wan, who, by the way, did not get attacked as he did in the original timeline because Order 66 has not been executed yet. Suddenly, Anakin would walk in and Mace will ask him what he learned from Maul, to which Anakin would yell, "Lies. Nothing but lies." Obi-Wan would try to calm Anakin down, but Anakin will just keep going on about how Maul was lying. No one would say anything for a moment, allowing Anakin the time to chill out, basically. The silence would be broken by Mace Windu, again asking Anakin what Maul told him. Anakin will look at Mace Windu and with disbelief in his voice say the following. Maul says Darth Sidious and Chancellor Palpatine are not in league with each other. Instead they're, at which point Yoda would interject and say one and the same. Darth Sidious, the Chancellor is, Yoda would say. Anakin would yell out in protest. If a Sith Lord was so close to them for so many years, why didn't any of the Jedi see it? To which Obi-Wan would repeat what Count Dooku told him on Geonosis. The dark side has clouded the Jedi's vision. Obi-Wan would then ask Anakin if the Chancellor has ever spoke of the Sith or the dark side. Anakin would say with some hesitation that yes, but he will argue that the Chancellor is a very knowledgeable man. He knows many things. He knows a lot about the galactic history, which includes the history of the Sith. That alone does not prove anything, Anakin would say. Anakin's mind was looking for every reason to convince himself that Chancellor Palpatine was not a Sith Lord, but things were starting to make sense to him. Chancellor Palpatine had always been close to him ever since he arrived on Coruscant, and very often he would speak ill of the Jedi. Anakin always thought he meant that as a politician, but now he sees that if what Maul says is true, if Darth Sidious does indeed want him as his apprentice and has been grooming him ever since he arrived on Coruscant, then it has to be Chancellor Palpatine. As Anakin sits there, contemplating all of this, Obi-Wan would again ask Anakin if the Chancellor has ever said anything to indicate that he might have connection to the dark side. Anakin sits in silence, ignoring Obi-Wan, until a moment later he says, Darth Plagueis. This quickly grabs the attention of Mace, Yoda, and Obi-Wan. Anakin would look at them and continue. Anakin would explain how Chancellor Palpatine told him about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, how Darth Plagueis could use the dark side to keep people from dying, and how it's a Sith legend that the Jedi would never tell Anakin. But after hearing this, the Masters tell Anakin that they don't know of any such Sith legend, or a Darth Plagueis. Darth Plagueis, by the way, in case you don't know, was Palpatine's Sith Master. His non-Sith name was Hugo Damask. Yoda would then explain to Anakin how Palpatine was manipulating Anakin into becoming Palpatine's apprentice by using Anakin's fears. Yoda goes on to explain how Palpatine hoped to gain Anakin's allegiance against the Jedi by offering Anakin a way to stop his visions from becoming true. This was Palpatine's plan all along, ever since he saw Anakin as a youngling, to befriend him, gain his trust, and eventually manipulate Anakin into becoming a Sith apprentice and fulfill the rule of two. Yoda would tell Anakin that the dark side can only bring pain and that Palpatine was consumed by the dark. Anakin wouldn't say anything to any of this, still trying to process all this information. Yoda would then tell the other Masters not to confront Palpatine till he arrived back on Coruscant, because they needed to know exactly what Palpatine's plan was before they did anything. At this point, Anakin would say, the clones. Anakin would go on to explain what Fives told them before he was gunned down. The clones all have an inhibitor chip inside their head that would force them to obey certain orders, no matter what. Anakin would arrive at the conclusion that Palpatine plans to use the Republic's own army against the Jedi. This realization terrifies the Masters, as the clones were pretty much everywhere, and for all they knew, Palpatine could decide to use them against the Jedi at any moment, especially now that Grievous was dead, and the war is almost at an end. But Obi-Wan would suggest that Palpatine wouldn't do anything until he has Anakin by his side, and since that hasn't happened yet, the Jedi have time. But in the meantime, the Jedi had a different problem. Maul would arrive on Coruscant soon, and when he does, the Jedi could not risk Palpatine finding out what Maul told Anakin. But unfortunately, there was nothing the Jedi could do about it. Apparently, Chancellor Palpatine, for obvious reasons, had taken a special interest in Darth Maul and wanted to see him as soon as he arrives on Coruscant. In case you're wondering why Palpatine wants this, well, it's because he wants to get Maul killed. The same way he had Fives killed. So you see, when Fives figured out about the inhibitor chips and was trying to warn everyone, Palpatine requested to meet with Fives. And when Palpatine was with Fives, he made Fives attack him. We don't get to see how this happens, how Palpatine got Fives to attack him. He probably told Fives that he was behind the inhibitor chips. But anyways, Palpatine did this, hoping that the other clones that were with Palpatine would kill Fives. This didn't work and Fives ended up surviving for a little longer. But anyways, point is, this was Palpatine's plan to deal with Maul. And that's why he wanted to immediately meet with Maul as soon as he arrived on Coruscant. Maul was a loose end and Palpatine could not afford to have him running around alive. But before Palpatine killed him, he would obviously ask Maul if he told anything to the Jedi. And that's what the Jedi were afraid of. But due to the orders that Palpatine had in place and not wanting to arouse Palpatine's suspicion in the Jedi that they know something, the Jedi were pretty much helpless. So to help them deal with this issue, Kenobi decides to bring in some outside help. And this outside help was Bo-Katan Kryze. Again, if you don't know who that is, pause and read this. So anyways, Obi-Wan contacts Bo-Katan and requests her to send a group of Mandalorians to break Maul out of prison once he is brought to Coruscant. At first, Bo-Katan refuses because of how crazy this plan is, but then Kenobi would explain to her that the entire fate of the Republic might hang in the balance, even slightly hinting that Bo-Katan owes them for helping her out with the situation on Mandalore, which by the way resulted in Bo-Katan becoming the regent of Mandalore. Bo-Katan would then ask Kenobi why exactly they want Maul out of Coruscant, but obviously Kenobi cannot tell her without jeopardizing the Jedi's future even more. But ultimately, Bo-Katan relents and agrees to help Kenobi, and the Republic basically. Okay, so now fast forward to Maul being brought to Coruscant. So after Maul is brought to Coruscant, he was taken to the Republic Judiciary Central Detention Center, to be held till questioning and trial probably. However, Palpatine obviously knew of Maul's arrival and wanted Maul gone as quickly as possible, because Maul was a loose end and him being alive increased the chance of the Jedi finding out about Palpatine's plans. And because of this, Palpatine made dealing with Darth Maul his primary priority. So Palpatine's plan to get rid of Darth Maul, like I said before, was similar to the plan that he used to get rid of Fives. Palpatine would request that he be left alone with Darth Maul, then he will kill Maul and make it look like Maul was killed after trying to kill Palpatine. But unknown to Palpatine, Obi-Wan had hired the help of Mandalorians to get Maul out of that prison before he got to him. So the Mandalorians that Bo-Katan sent for this mission were part of the Night Owls. So the Night Owls, in case you don't know, were a group of Mandalorians who were loyal to Bo-Katan. So they were the only ones that would do this for Bo-Katan. So the Night Owls, now disguised as prison guards, were able to easily access the prison because they had the help of the Jedi. They were also able to quickly locate where Maul was being housed, but when they got to Maul's cell, the Night Owls encountered a problem. So because of how important Maul was, Palpatine had ordered extra security around his cell. And to make matters worse, they heard on the prison's internal comms that they had with them that Chancellor Palpatine was arriving. But Mandalorians, being some of the most elite warriors in the galaxy, always had a backup plan. And here, the backup plan was explosives. So because of help from the Jedi, the Night Owls knew pretty much everything about this prison, especially its vulnerabilities. So just in case the Night Owls needed some kind of a distraction to extract Maul, some of the Night Owls had explosives placed in certain key locations in the prison. They did it in a way to minimize casualties while at the same time providing an adequate enough distraction. So in this situation, where they needed to get some of the guards away from Maul's cell, under the orders of Ursa Wren, the Night Owl who was leading this operation, some of the explosives were set off. And they weren't all set off at once, they were set off one by one, which made the prison security personnel confused. So when this happened, a lot of the prison security was directed towards dealing with this explosive situation, and at the same time, the guards stationed outside of Maul's cell took action and started moving Maul to a safer location. So now that they had their distraction, as the guards were moving Maul, the Night Owls quickly moved in, ambushed them, sedated Maul, and then also set off an explosive to go off near Maul's cell. The prison guards who were in charge of transporting Maul unfortunately died in this explosion, but sacrifices had to be made, I guess. So at this point, 3 of the Night Owls were making their way out of the prison with Maul. And as the Night Owls were making their way out of the prison, more explosives were being set off. So the purpose of these explosives wasn't just to create a distraction, however. The explosives were obviously going to get a lot of people injured within the prison, and to help these injured people, medical shuttles would obviously arrive at the prison. So the Night Owls were planning on getting Maul out of there by passing him off as an injured prisoner into one of these medical shuttles, but not into some random medical shuttle. The Night Owls actually came prepared, because they had a few medical shuttles that were under their control, waiting nearby. But basically that was their plan to get Mole out of there. The Night Owls were hoping that in a scenario such as this where people were in urgent need of medical care, no one would stop anyone to verify their identity. And even if they did, all the Night Owls had their own fake prison guard IDs, and their medical shuttles also had their own security clearance. The reason they could arrange all of this in such short notice was mainly due to the help from the Jedi. But anyways, there was one thing that the Night Owls didn't really take into consideration while designing this plan, and that was the presence of Chancellor Palpatine, who by this point had arrived at the prison but obviously could not go in. And Palpatine, being the powerful Dark Lord of the Sith that he is, figured that someone is doing all this to get Mole out of there. And to prevent that, Palpatine ordered the Republic Guard to not let anyone, even injured prisoners, leave the prison vicinity without verifying who they actually were. Inside the prison, the Owls had made it out of these cell blocks and were now in the administrative section, close to the exit. They thought everything was going to plan until Ursa Wren received a transmission from outside. So over this transmission, Ursa Wren was informed of how Chancellor Palpatine wasn't letting anyone out of there until their identities have been verified. This of course ruined the Night Owls' initial plan of extracting Mole, but the Owls had a backup plan. Wren would tell the Owls inside the med transport that they'll use a different exit. Apparently there was another way to leave the prison, through a closed-off section of maintenance tunnels beneath the prison. However, they didn't exactly know how to find this exit. Ursa would then contact the droid that they brought with them, the Slice Force B3. So B3, because he had access to all the prison's plans, knew where everything was, and would tell Ursa exactly how to get to the maintenance tunnels. So the three Night Owls and a sedated Mole, following B3's instructions, would find their way to the nearest turbo lift. The maintenance tunnels were obviously a lot of levels below where they were, but as they were making their way down the turbo lift, the guards on the lower levels wouldn't be so preoccupied as the ones on the levels above. So, to deal with this, the Owls needed an even bigger distraction, and this distraction came in the form of Dioxys gas. So Dioxys is a toxic gas. You've seen it before in The Phantom Menace. This is Dioxys right here. It is the same gas that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn run away from in The Phantom Menace. So Ursa would now order B3 to release these small, concentrated Dioxys gas canisters, which the Owls had placed in certain key locations in the prison. And after receiving the order, B3 does as instructed and releases the gas. So the plan works, and moments after the gas was detected in the prison ventilation system, the entire prison is ordered to be evacuated, because they don't know where the gas could be coming from, and if they don't evacuate the place, everyone inside the prison could die. So because of this, all the prison personnel and the prisoners are to be evacuated immediately. The Owls hear this evacuation warning on the prison's internal comms, and believe that this will make their escape through the maintenance tunnels easier. But as the Owls were making their way down the levels after having downed a small breathing apparatus, they encountered another problem. The turbo lift they were on stopped at the nearest level, opened its doors, and none of the controls were working when they tried to make it go down again. Ursa contacted the droid B3 asking him what caused it. B3 then connected to one of the terminals and told Ursa that due to the evacuation protocols, no one was allowed to go to the lower levels, because that would only make their evacuation harder apparently. Ursa then asked the droid if it could override these protocols, and the droid says yes, but it will take a moment. And to make matters worse, the droid also notifies Ursa that the Republic Guard have arrived at the vicinity and were now monitoring the prison's computer system, which means pretty soon the Republic Guard would figure out that B3 is trying to override evacuation procedures, which could lead the guards right to the Night Owls. Ursa would tell B3 to make sure that doesn't happen and to hurry up with overriding these protocols. We then got to Chancellor Palpatine being informed by the Republic Guard that they have detected a droid accessing the security systems to try and override certain evacuation protocols. Palpatine quickly figures that this droid obviously has something to do with everything that's been going on in the prison, and orders the Republic Guard to not destroy the droid upon capture. And he also instructs the Republic Guard to make sure that every possible exit from the prison is being monitored, and to use clone troopers for that. So in the meantime, B3 has gotten the turbo lift start working again, and the Owls continue their descent down the levels. And also during this time, the clone troopers were making their way into where they detected the droid's presence. So B3 tells Ursa that it wouldn't be able to help them for much longer. So soon after, the Owls reached the lower levels, and with B3's help, they were able to quickly locate where the entrance to the maintenance tunnels were located. But at the same exact time, clone troopers also find B3, at which point B3 tells Ursa that they don't have much time left and then says goodbye before self-destructing. So after the Owls make their way into the tunnels, they hear the door that they walked in through close behind them. The Owls were now stuck inside this narrow, claustrophobia-inducing maze-like tunnel filled with pipes and wires, and now they had to navigate these tunnels to get out of there, that too without B3's help. but the owls still had the schematics of the place with them, and because of this, they are able to navigate the tunnels. The night owls, now realizing that at any moment the clone troopers could figure out their plan and follow them, quicken their pace, and at the same time, they notice that Maul is starting to move. The effects of the sedative that they gave him have begun to wear off sooner than they expected. This may have been due to Maul's connection with the Force, but the owls didn't have time to think about any of that, because they needed to get out of there as fast as they could. So pretty soon, they find the closed-off section of the tunnels which they needed to get through. It was welded shut, but one of the owls placed a tiny explosive on this welded-off section of the tunnels. They get away from it, set off the explosive, break through the tunnel, and walk in. So eventually, as they ran through these tunnels, they saw a shimmer of light in the distance, which indicated that they were now close to the exit, and that they could finally leave this place, which they had already told their people on the outside where they'll be exiting the prison complex, but not to approach the place until Ursa gave a signal, because a speeder just sitting there in the middle of nowhere would arouse suspicion. So as the owls approached the light at the end of the tunnel, they began hearing the sounds of Coruscant, the speeders, wind, and eventually they reached the end of the tunnel and just simply walked out. They placed Maul down, and Ursa immediately contacted the other owls and told them to come pick them up. But as they were waiting, Ursa heard a sound coming from behind them. She turned around to find 6 clone troopers pointing their blasters at them. If the Night Owls had their Beskar Mandalorian armor with them, they could have done something, but in this situation, they were pretty much helpless. The owls had blasters with them, but the clone troopers were standing quite a bit away from them, and if the owls even tried to reach for their blasters, they'd drop dead. So as the owls were standing there processing what was happening, one of the clones was heard saying, "We found some of them." The clones then told the owls to remove their blasters and place them on the ground, one by one. We'll then cut to Palpatine being informed that a prisoner has been found to have escaped through the maintenance tunnels, along with 3 other accomplices. Palpatine would ask what this prisoner looked like, and they will give a description of Maul. Palpatine would then order the people to not be killed, and have him taken to these escapees as soon as possible. So as per Palpatine's instructions, a clone commander tries to transmit his orders to the clones that caught the escapees, but this clone commander doesn't get a response. We'll then get to a shot of one of the clones that were holding the owls at blaster point, lying on the ground with his head twisted the other way. So what happened was Maul woke up. So when the clones confronted the Night Owls, they, for a moment, forgot about Maul and how he was starting to wake up. And because of this, they did not administer a second sedative, but that ultimately ended up being a good thing, because Maul, after turning one clone's head the other way around, holds the others in air before crushing their throats. He only killed the clones, by the way. Maul then looks at Ursa Wren, extends his gratitude, and begins to walk away. Ursa, realizing that their mission was to bring in Maul, tries to throw a sedative dart at him. That of course does not work because Maul holds this sedative dart in the air, turns it around, and launches it at Ursa, and Maul then runs away. The other owls do not chase him, because like I said before, they didn't have any of their Mandalorian armor with them, so they were pretty much no match for Maul, who was an agent of the dark side. So shortly thereafter, the owls as transport arrive, and they immediately leave the area without Maul. But before the owls leave, one of them does paint something on the armor of one of the clones. So a little later, Palpatine arrives at the scene and finds all the dead clones, with the escapees having escaped again. He would inspect the bodies of the clones and find a symbol painted onto one of the clones, the symbol of Death Watch. So the Night Owls plan to make it look like that not every member of Death Watch that supported Maul died in the Siege of Mandalore, and that some of them came back to rescue him. Also, Death Watch, by the way, was created by Free Vizsla. Maul kinda took over it when he defeated Free Vizsla in single combat for that Darksaber. Pause and read this if you wanna know more about that. Anyways, Palpatine realizes that it's a symbol of Death Watch, but he feels as though there is something bigger going on there, and he just walks away. We will then pick up with Obi-Wan Kenobi being contacted by Bo-Katan Kryze, who informs Kenobi that while her Night Owls successfully managed to extract Maul from the prison, he later escaped their grasp after they failed to notice Maul waking up because of the whole situation with the clones. Obi-Wan would then ask Bo-Katan if they have any idea where Maul went, to which they would say no. But the good news is that the Republic won't be able to find Maul either, because the owls removed his prisoner tracking chip. Bo-Katan would then say that she regrets all the loss of life that was caused due to this mission. Hearing this, Obi-Wan would stay silent for a moment before telling Bo-Katan that they're at war. That's how Kenobi and the rest of the council justified all this. Keep in mind that by this point, the Jedi have gotten extremely desperate. We then pick up with Mace, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Anakin discussing how they should deal with this Maul situation. Anakin says that they should find Maul before Palpatine does, and Obi-Wan says that Coruscant is a big place, and Maul could be pretty much anywhere, if he's even on the planet. To which Mace Windu says that Palpatine would be using every resource he has to find Maul, so it would be pretty much impossible for Maul to even show his head in the upper levels of Coruscant, let alone try to leave the planet without risking capture. Listening to all this, Yoda would then say that Maul will find them first, if them, the Jedi, give Maul the chance to do so. As for why Maul would do that, Yoda would say that he feels as though Maul and the Jedi have similar goals at this point. So as all of this is going on, the Jedi would also need to inquire into the exact nature of the inhibitor chips that was within every single clone. Based on what Five said, Anakin theorizes that if anyone could offer insight into the nature of the inhibitor chips, that would be the Kaminoans. But the Jedi also come to the conclusion that the Kaminoans are probably in on the Sith plan, which they were. So Anakin devises a plan. Anakin, along with Ahsoka and R2, would go to Kamino under the guise of inspecting the production of clone units. With the war now almost over, clone production doesn't need to be as quick as it used to be, so Anakin would go to Kamino as a representative of the Jedi to explain this. But while there, R2 would connect to a computer terminal and extract all the information the Kaminoans have on the clones. But to do this, they will also require a distraction, which is why Ahsoka is there. So this distraction would again come in the form of the Night Owls, pretending to be Death Watch. So the Night Owls, who are disguised as Death Watch, would attack the Kaminoan cloning facility, causing a distraction. And as for why Death Watch would attack Kamino, well, the Jedi could explain to the Kaminoans that Death Watch, the ones loyal to Maul, hold a grudge against Ahsoka because she was the one who led the charge against capturing Maul from Mandalore. And to make it more believable, they would also pretend that Ahsoka was taken by Death Watch. So that was Anakin's plan. Anakin and Ahsoka would go to Kamino under the guise of examining the clones. The Night Owls would then attack the place, distracting the Kaminoan security, during which R2 will find a computer terminal and extract all the information that the Jedi need. So that was the plan, but for that to work, Ahsoka would need to agree to join the Jedi once again, because officially she is no longer a member of the Jedi. Ahsoka would of course agree to this, given the serious nature of what they're doing. And as for getting the Night Owls to help the Jedi again, after the very big favor that Bo-Katan did the Jedi, it would be difficult to convince Bo-Katan to help them again. But given that it involves Ahsoka, she would agree to help once again. But she would also emphasize that this would be the last time she will be doing anything for the Jedi, and that they owe her big. Which was true. So Anakin along with Ahsoka and R2 will leave to Kamino to enact this plan. In the meantime, Obi-Wan would try to find Maul. Not by going after him, but by letting Maul come to Obi-Wan, like Yoda said. So as for where Maul was during this time, well, he was near the Jedi Temple, pretending to be a person begging on the street. There were many homeless people in Coruscant, by the way. So the reason why Maul was near the Jedi Temple was, like Yoda said, he wanted to speak with the Jedi, Obi-Wan in particular. Maul knew he couldn't try to leave the planet. If he did, he would almost definitely be caught, and being a prisoner of Sidious is worse than dying, because Maul had been Sidious's prisoner before. So not long after Maul began his search, he felt a presence, and this presence, of course, came from Kenobi. So Maul let the Force be his guide and followed this presence. We'll then get to Kenobi walking the streets of Coruscant, giving Maul every chance to speak with him without risking capture. And eventually, Kenobi will also sense Maul's presence. Kenobi would then slowly walk into Dex's diner, which we saw in Attack of the Clones. Kenobi would sit there, waiting for this dark presence to come to him. Kenobi would feel this presence come closer and closer until he feels it right next to him, at which point Kenobi will look up to see Darth Jar Jar looking down on Kenobi with glowing yellow eyes. No, it was actually Darth Maul. He then pick up with the events on Kamino. So Anakin's plan worked. R2 was able to successfully extract the information they needed from the Kaminoan computers, and Ahsoka was now with the Night Owls. R2 would tell Anakin that he's found something interesting within the data that he collected from Kamino. And this interesting bit of data would be the 150 orders that the inhibitor chips would force the clones to follow. Anakin would go through these 150 orders, and one order in particular would stand out to him. We then cut to the Jedi Temple with Mace and Yoda. Yoda tells Mace that everything they've been doing recently has been leading them down a dark path. To which Mace says that they have no choice and that he senses a plot to destroy the Jedi, and that they need to move quickly if the Jedi Order is to survive. So after having this discussion, they receive a transmission from Anakin Skywalker. Anakin tells the Masters that his mission was a success and that Ahsoka is now with the Night Owls. Anakin then shares his findings with Yoda and Mace. So what Anakin found was information on Order 66. So the following is the fine print of Order 66. In the event of Jedi officers acting against the interests of the Republic, and after receiving specific orders verified as coming directly from the Supreme Chancellor, GAR commanders will remove these officers by lethal force, and the command of the GAR will revert to the Supreme Chancellor until a new command structure is established. So Anakin shares this with the Jedi Masters and reveals that Palpatine plans to use this order against the Jedi. But to execute this order, Palpatine would need some kind of evidence that the Jedi Order has acted against the interests of the Republic. For example, if the Jedi Order tried to commit treason against the Republic by trying to arrest the Supreme Chancellor, that might be reason enough for Palpatine to execute Order 66 on the Jedi. And because of the inhibitor chips, the clones would be forced to execute these commands, no matter how close of a relationship they had with the Jedi. So that was Palpatine's plan, and now the Jedi know of it. The Masters would then ask Anakin to return to the Jedi Temple as quick as possible, and to not share this information with anyone. And with that, Anakin ends transmission. And right after Anakin leaves, Obi-Wan walks in with Darth Maul. The Masters of course sense Maul's presence, but they don't immediately draw out their lightsabers to fight Maul, because they knew that Maul wanted the same thing that the Jedi wanted, which is to get rid of Palpatine. Maul would then look at Yoda and say that it's nice to finally meet him. We then cut to a little later where Obi-Wan and Mace are discussing what they should do with Maul. Obi-Wan would say that bringing Maul to the Jedi Temple was better than leaving him out in the street, where he could have been detected by Palpatine. Mace would then ask Obi-Wan how they should deal with Palpatine. Kenobi would say that he's not sure, but the longer they wait trying to come up with a plan gives Palpatine more time to enact his plan. Kenobi would go on to say that if they don't stop Palpatine soon, he might decide to execute Order 66 without having Anakin at his side, thinking he could later convince Anakin that the Jedi were plotting to take over. Which is true because similar to the Jedi, Palpatine must also have been growing desperate, especially with the whole Maul situation going on. Kenobi then says that maybe they could get Maul to testify before the Senate of everything that Palpatine was up to, but Mace would argue that the Senate wouldn't trust the testimony of some random nobody. Also, side note, being a Sith itself wasn't illegal in the Republic. The Republic allowed for freedom of religion. During the time of the Old Republic, there was an anti-Sith law, but that had since been nullified. So the only way the Jedi could legally deal with Palpatine was to prove that he orchestrated the Clone Wars, which was now difficult because Maul, even if he knew everything, which he didn't, wouldn't be a reliable witness, and Count Dooku, who may have been a more reliable witness, is now dead. So, given the predicament they're in, Mace Windu comes up with the following plan. So Mace would tell Kenobi that in times of war, sacrifices need to be made, and that he will be that sacrifice. He will go confront Palpatine and kill him. Mace tells Kenobi that the Council could tell the Senate that Mace acted on his own will, he went rogue, and protect the Jedi Order by sacrificing Mace. So that was Mace's plan. Kenobi would argue against this, but Mace would tell him that Palpatine was too dangerous to be left alive, and by not ending him, they're risking the life of every single Jedi in the galaxy. Obi-Wan will listen to all of this and think about it without saying much. Meanwhile, Maul would also be having a conversation with Yoda. Maul would tell Yoda of everything that Palpatine did to him, and how he was supposed to be his future apprentice when he took over the galaxy. Maul would tell Yoda that if Anakin Skywalker wasn't around, he would soon have been the second most powerful person in the galaxy. Maul would go on about how he hates Palpatine and how Palpatine killed his brother, and Yoda, after listening to all of this, would tell Maul that the dark side only leads to pain, and that Maul's entire life has been a testimony to that. This would anger Maul, but he wouldn't really say anything because deep down inside, Maul did know that Yoda was right. Mace and Kenobi would then walk over to Yoda and Maul, and Mace would tell Yoda his plan to go pretty much assassinate Palpatine. Mace would explain that there really isn't any other way to prevent this, because as long as the Chancellor remains alive, the prospect of Order 66 being executed increases. But if the Supreme Chancellor is not alive, according to Order 66, the order cannot be executed unless it is verified as coming directly from the Supreme Chancellor. So if the Supreme Chancellor, Palpatine, dies, Order 66 cannot be executed. So the two other Masters and Maul listened to this plan of Mace, and Maul would then speak up telling Mace that he would join him. Mace would first refuse, but then Maul would explain how Maul being there with Mace as he kills Palpatine gives more credence to the fact that Mace went rogue. This would make sense to Mace, and he would agree, and right then, Grandmaster Yoda would tell Mace that he too will join Mace. Because Yoda is 900 years old, he's given his life for the Jedi Order, and ultimately Yoda will do anything to protect it, and to protect the lives of the thousands of Jedi who are scattered throughout the galaxy. And finally, Kenobi would also agree to join, because keeping Anakin safe is ultimately Kenobi's duty. Because even though Anakin is a Jedi Knight now, and no longer Kenobi's apprentice, Anakin is like a brother to Kenobi, so Kenobi would do anything to protect Anakin and to protect the greater Jedi Order, so he too agrees to join. So with that decided, the three Masters, along with Maul, who is now wearing a clone trooper armor to disguise himself, head on over to the Chancellor's office. We would then cut to Anakin returning to Coruscant. He would run into the Jedi Temple and to the Council chambers, but he doesn't find Yoda, Kenobi, or Mace. This would initially confuse Anakin. He would be scared if something happened to them, especially because he hasn't been able to contact them for a while. Anakin would think for a moment, then he realizes what the Masters have probably done. And with this realization, Anakin runs to a speeder. We then cut to Mace walking into Palpatine's office, but unlike in the original timeline where Mace walked in with Kit Fisto and 2 other Masters, here Mace would be accompanied by Yoda, Kenobi, and Darth Maul. Palpatine would turn around on his chair and look at the Masters and tell Master Yoda that it's a surprise seeing them there, and that it's nice that they captured the prisoner, Maul, and brought him to him. At which point Maul would take off his helmet and ignite a green lightsaber because the Jedi did not have a red lightsaber with them. Maul would then tell Palpatine the following: "This is the end for you, my master." And then Maul would lunge at Palpatine, but Palpatine would simply use the Force to push him away. He would then accuse the other Masters of committing treason, and realizing that he can't fight all of them, Palpatine offers to surrender to the Jedi Council. Listening to this, the Masters, Yoda, Kenobi, and Mace, would all ignite their lightsabers, and Mace would tell Palpatine that it's too late for that, my lord. And then all 3, along with Maul, would engage Palpatine. Okay, so right here, regardless of what lightsaber forms they used, Palpatine was not going to be able to fight off the 4 of them. It was hard enough for him to fight off Yoda. He almost got defeated by Mace, but here he was facing both Mace, Yoda, Kenobi, and on top of that, his own former apprentice, Darth Maul. So Palpatine would no doubt be defeated. Seeing as how he couldn't best them in combat, Palpatine would use his Force lightning with every ounce of power he had. And like in the original timeline, Mace Windu would deflect this lightning back onto Palpatine, which would, as it did in the original, remove that mask that Palpatine was holding up, revealing his original form. And like in the original timeline, Palpatine would lay there, exhausted, with Mace Windu standing above him. Palpatine, realizing that he's been defeated, would even plead to Maul to help him, and that he was wrong to cast him aside. Maul, of course, does not believe it, and tells Palpatine that he doesn't need someone as weak as Sidious as his master. So at this moment, as Palpatine is about to be killed by either Mace or Maul, Anakin walks in and sees his vision come true. Palpatine would start yelling out to Anakin to help him, and that the Jedi are taking over, just as he told Anakin they would. Anakin would stand there, not knowing what to do, and he would tell Master Windu that they should put Palpatine on trial. Mace would say that that would serve no purpose, and that every moment Palpatine stays alive, the chance of every single Jedi in the galaxy dying grows larger. Anakin can't really argue with this, given everything he knows in this timeline. Anakin would then look to Yoda and Kenobi, but they would both remain speechless. Yoda would close his eyes and look away, and Kenobi will tell Anakin that this is the only way. Palpatine would then use the final weapon he had. Palpatine would tell Anakin that only through Palpatine and the dark side can Anakin prevent the death of Padme. Anakin would think about this for a moment, and then he would ask Palpatine if he also knew of his mother dying. Anakin did tell Palpatine about that, but back then Anakin didn't know that Sidious was a powerful Sith, and that he could have saved his mother if he wanted to. Anakin would confront Palpatine on this, why he let his mother die when he could have saved her. Palpatine would argue that the Jedi are no different than him because they too knew of his visions. In Attack of the Clones, we see Anakin share these visions with Kenobi, who pretty much does nothing to deal with it. This would again leave Anakin speechless, and Anakin would then look at Darth Maul, who was staring right back at him. And in Darth Maul, Anakin sees himself, because Maul was a former apprentice of Sidious, who Sidious offered the world to, and he was now here, half man, half machine. He would then think of Tyrannus, Count Dooku, another apprentice of Darth Sidious, who Sidious himself told Anakin to kill. Anakin, now realizing that Sidious discarded Dooku because Sidious believed that Anakin would become a better apprentice. So ultimately it becomes clear to Skywalker that Palpatine, so him, Anakin, as nothing more than a tool to use and throw away, just like he did with Tyrannus and Maul. But side note, the conclusion that Anakin arrived at wasn't entirely true. Palpatine always believed that Anakin would be his true apprentice and will one day take over the Empire from Palpatine. So Palpatine did not see Anakin as simply another tool, at least up until the point where he lost his arms and was set on fire by Obi-Wan in the original timeline. But anyways, in this alternate timeline, Anakin doesn't know all of this and believes that Palpatine only wanted him until he could find a better apprentice, a different tool. So having realized all of this, Anakin would tell Palpatine that Palpatine only ever cared about himself, and had he became his apprentice, he would have lost everything he cared about, just like Tyrannus and Maul. Palpatine attempts to counter this, but all of a sudden, Palpatine feels a grip on his throat. It was Maul. Maul would tell Palpatine that he's talked enough. Anakin would then look away, But before Mace could kill Palpatine, Mace is pulled to the side. When the Jedi turn around, they see it wasn't Jar Jar, it was Darth Maul. Maul pulls Palpatine close to him, by the throat with the Force, and then cuts Palpatine in half, just like what Obi-Wan did to Maul. Maul would then push Sidious out of his window, and that would mark the end of the Rule of Two. It ended with the final member of the Rule of Two turning into two equal parts. So now, with Palpatine dead, Anakin wouldn't turn to the dark side, Padme wouldn't die, and Luke and Leia wouldn't have to live a life of misery. So now that they've killed Palpatine, the Jedi had a different problem. They've just committed treason and assassinated the leader of the Republic. That too with Darth Maul. So there are a number of ways things could go from this point on. And to cover that, I will make an epilogue. And that epilogue will be based on what you guys want it to be. So leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will make the most liked comment the epilogue to this video, even if it includes Darth Jar Jar. But anyways, do subscribe if you want to watch more Star Wars content. Goodbye, have a good day, and stay hydrated.